Thank you, and good evening. My name is Mark Levy. I'm the Chief Tax Assessor for the City of Somerville. I've held that position for about 5 years. I've been working in the Assessors Office since 1991. In total, I have 25 years' experience in the field of assessing. I also have a residential Massachusetts assessing designation and a Massachusetts accredited assessing designation known as an MAA. I'd like to introduce a couple of staff people who are with me here tonight. Linda Swartz, who has an MAA as our Director of Commercial Assessments. Linda's been with the Assessors Office for 18 years, has 25 years experience in the assessing field. Also, Mary Lou Ireland, who has an MAA, Manager of Residential Assessments. Mary Lou's been with the Assessors Office about 7 years with a total of 10 years experience. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. It keeps coming out to about 15 to 18 minutes or so, but I think it's important to get some points out and present some information before we open it up to comments and questions. I know there's a certain amount of frustration out there and that people have concerns about their assessed values and property taxes this year. But I want to make the point, the last thing we want to do is drive people out of the city. We have no interest in seeing businesses move. We have no interest in forcing people from their homes. The State Department of Revenue oversees all assessing jurisdictions in the Commonwealth in accordance with Chapter 59 of the Massachusetts General Laws. It is the assessors, however, who are responsible for putting assessed values on properties. However, in essence, all we're doing is interpreting the market. It is basically buyers and sellers, tenants and landlords who shape the market. We simply come along and interpret the numbers we see. And all of it must be certified by the State Department of Revenue. Now, every 3 years, all assessors' offices in all cities and towns must have their property assessments certified by the DOR, also known as a revaluation year. Fiscal 2014 was such a year. Certification or revaluation requires the assessors to meet comprehensive and rigorous standards of performance as determined by the Department of Revenue to ensure that our assessments reflect full and fair cash value for the year in question. Now, there's numerous standards. I'm going to give you some of the highlights. One of the standards is the review and analysis of all the sales that occur in the city. The basic requirement is that there must be a minimum assessment to sale ratio of at least 90%. What does that mean? A good example would be that if all the single-family homes in the city had a median sale price of $400,000, then by Department of Revenue regulation, the median assessed value of those single-family properties would have to have a median assessment of $360,000. That would be the 90%. In addition to that, we must update land value schedules, which affect land value, obviously, the neighborhoods, because the same property in one part of the city is going to sell for a different amount in a different part of the city. We have to adjust our cost and base rates, which affect building value. We have to conduct property inspections to ensure that our data is accurate and up to date, but we're doing that year-round, every year. We have to review income and expense forms that are returned by landlords and tenants, if taxpayers, to determine rental rates, vacancy rates, and expense rates, all allowing us to develop an income approach to value. As I said, we have to also review neighborhoods. Every property in the city is in an assessment district or neighborhood. And then even within those larger neighborhoods, there are some sub-neighborhoods, some hot spots where sales have simply run too far ahead of assessed values, and they get a little bit of an additional land value. A revaluation is a long, difficult process that can be tough on assessors and it can be tough on taxpayers. We understand that. The reval began last year at this time. It took us about 9 months to complete. Our values were submitted to the State Department of Revenue in September. They were not approved until November of 2013. Now, as far as commercial goes, the last major across-the-board increase was in fiscal '07, which also happened to be a revaluation year. It wasn't up until last fiscal year that we noticed there started to be some changes in the marketplace. We were starting to see higher sales, higher rental information, and lower vacancy rates. Now, normally, the reval cycle would have been fiscal 2013. It's every 3 years. We had one in '07. Things were flat in fiscal 2010. When we got to fiscal 2013, that should have been a state-required revaluation year. But a funny thing happened. The Department of Revenue got behind in their schedule. Moreover, they had too many communities coming up for a certification in the same fiscal year. So they decided they were going to push some communities back. Somerville was one such community. Instead of having a reval in 2013, we were pushed back to fiscal 2014. And I might add that they only did this for the communities they trusted, the communities they felt had been doing a good job. Somerville was one of those communities. Now, since commercial values in particular did not change at that time, there were no changes to our base rates or cost rates affecting building value. There were no changes to our land schedule affecting land value and the land schedule. I said that, okay. As far as residential goes, residential remained somewhat flat during this period, but with so many more sales to review, some adjustments were needed in fiscal 2013. For example, in fiscal 2013, our single families, to meet that minimum assessment sale ratio I spoke about earlier, had to go up on average citywide 3%. But most folks did not see an adjustment in 2013. Now, the fact is that in fiscal 2013, we felt we could have started to build, in particular, commercial value back up a bit. We saw higher sales, we saw higher rents, but we made a conscious decision that we were going to wait until the reval year. So some of the value that folks are seeing now could have been built in fiscal 2013. But we knew that with the reval year coming, we were going to have that many more sales at our disposal. We were going to have that many more income and expense forms to review. We were going to have more and better data. So we made the decision to wait. So I think in some regard, folks are feeling the effects of changes that could have really began in fiscal 2013. Now, one of the many things we look at, especially in a revaluation year, are the income and expense forms that landlords are mailed. And we've normally averaged about a 28 to 30% return on the income and expense information. In fiscal 2014, at the recommendation of the Department of Revenue, we sent out additional forms. By additional, I mean to people who did not initially respond. We also sent out some certified mail to some of our larger taxpayers. So we boosted our return rate from about 28 to 30% up to 40%. That made a big difference. Again, this is a case of more is better. The more information we have, the better our values can be. But it's important to note that that still means, as good as that 40% number was, that still means that 60% of the landlords failed to respond. The message sent to us was, well, go ahead and rely on the 40% who did. We need to have a better response. Our values are only as good as the information we receive. So I can't emphasize that enough. When that form comes in the mail in the spring, it's vitally important to have fair and equitable values to get those returns back. So fiscal 2014 became a reval year, became a year where we found big changes were needed to our commercial values. And some areas got hit harder. Innerbelt, Davis Square, Assembly Square, these are all hotspot areas where values had to come up quite a bit. Residential saw significant increases as well, especially to our single families and in a few areas where assessed values are simply lagging behind the sale prices. Now I want to throw out a few numbers just to give people some perspective. We've been hearing in the Assessors Office a lot of second and even third-hand information on the sentiment out there, what people are feeling relative to valuation increases. We've heard things in the media. We've read some articles. But of the 16,000 properties that had to be valued this year, there were only 110 that went up 50% or more. That's a small number. Now we look back at those, a similar comparison in fiscal '07 when we had our last major market adjustment on assessments. In fiscal '07, when we had less parcels, 14,300, because we had less condominium accounts back then, 78 properties, 78 out of 14,300 went up 50% or more. So I'm going to submit to you that these are not big numbers. There's no systemic problem. There's no citywide dissatisfaction that we're seeing. Doesn't mean someone can't still apply. Someone may still be overvalued. But the numbers are simply not there to suggest widespread dissatisfaction. I also went back and looked at the number of appeals we have received over the last 5 years, as well as the fiscal '07 revaluation. And I can tell you that the low point was in 1 year where we received 1.4% of the total parcel count out of the 16,000 properties we have. The high point was a reception of 2.8% appeals in a given fiscal year. Again, those are extremely small numbers. Said another way, the tax-paying public, 97 to 98% of the taxpayers have not filed appeals, have been satisfied with our assessments, and have not pursued the appeal process. I think that's very telling. As well, so far in fiscal 2014, we still have a little more than a week to go, we're running a little ahead of where we were last fiscal year. In fact, last fiscal year at this time, we had 11 less applications than we have now. The prior year, we had about 15 less. Again, these are small numbers. I'm going to ask taxpayers that I know not everybody's happy, as I wouldn't be either if I get a 50%, 75%, even 100% increase. But I'm going to ask you to keep things in perspective. For most taxpayers, it's been 7 years since there's been a major adjustment in values. That is a long, long time. I know there's a reaction now, but remember that for 7 years, things have been pretty flat. What the assessors do is mass appraisal. That means we're required to put an assessed value, in this case, on 16,000 properties. It's not an easy task. We're trying to hit the target for most of the taxpayers, for most of the properties, most of the time. For those who legitimately feel they are overvalued and their assessment does not reflect market value, they should pursue the appeal process. But I'm going to ask you to ask yourself, could I sell my property for about what the assessed value is? Could I get a little more than that? Could I get a little less than that? But is that assessed value in the ballpark? Now I'm going to turn my attention to the appeal process. Unlike mass appraisal, where we're trying to develop models and methods that work for all 16,000 properties, when we get to the appeal process, the assessors have the ability to dig a little deeper, to delve more specifically into that particular property. Some of the most basic questions we're going to ask if you do file an appeal is, did you allow us an inspection? Did you allow us to come into the property and go through it top to bottom? In some cases, if you have not, we're going to need to get in. In other cases, if you let us in, but you said, well, I can't get into the basement, I don't have the key. I can't get you into the attic. The tenant's not home, I don't have the key. That's fine, but at this point, we're going to have to come back and get into those spaces. Also, as I spoke earlier about the income and expense forms, if you have not submitted one and you file the appeal and you're an income-producing property, we're going to require that you give us the income and expense information. We have to have that. Now as well, might there be some specific thing about your property that we have not considered or we are unaware of? For example, do you have any structural defects in your building? Was there a fire recently? Was there a flood? Was there something specific or unique to your property, such as location? Is this drooping a bit? Okay. Is that better? Yeah, okay. Is there something specific to your property regarding its location, restrictions, extended vacancy? These are all things that the assessors have the ability to delve into more deeply once we get to the appeal process, things we may not have been aware of when we were doing the mass appraisal. Are you aware of any comparable sales? As much as the assessors go over the sales again and again and again, perhaps there's a comparable sale that you're aware of that you think we ought to take a look at or bring to our attention, even though we may have considered that. However, if you file an appeal, as much as it may hurt that you had a big increase in valuation or have undergone a significant tax hike, unfortunately, those are not grounds for abatement. Those are not reasons that the Board of Assessors can abate your tax bill. What you want to do, as best you can, is convince us that the assessed value in no way reflects a reasonable asking price that you could get for that property. Now, by statute, under Chapter 59, taxpayers must file their appeal within 1 month of the issuance of the actual tax bill. Normally, that means February 1. In fact, almost every year it's February 1, and it states that on the tax bill. This year, it's pushed to February 3rd because the first fell on a weekend. So folks have a few more days to get their appeal in. But I cannot emphasize enough, it must be in by the close of business in the assessor's office, not the tax collector's office, not the law office, not the mayor's office. It must be in the assessor's office by the close of business on Monday, February 3rd by 4:30. The one lone exception to that the Mass General laws allow you is that if you put an application in the mail properly addressed to the assessor's office, and it has a U.S. postmark of February 3rd or earlier, then the assessors are bound to accept that application. But it must have that postmark of February 3rd or earlier. And unfortunately, the statute does not allow the same for something coming through FedEx or UPS or some other quick delivery service. It must be the U.S. postal postmark. Now, I want to emphasize also that filing is free. You don't need an attorney. You don't need an appraisal. The applications are available in our office, and they're also online. If everyone has the handout you were given, it gives you a link-by-link, step-by-step instructions as to how to get to the assessor's website and download the application, as well as the income and expense forms that we would need if you're an income-producing property. And of course, our phone number is on the bottom. If anybody's having trouble with that, please give us a call. We can assist you with that. And of course, you're always welcome to come into the office. Thursday nights, as I'm sure most of you know by now, we're open till 7:30. That makes it a little more convenient. However, remember, we do close at 12:30 on Friday. Decisions, once you file, will be mailed to the applicant within 3 months of the date the application was filed. Those aggrieved by the decision of the board can appeal to the State Appellate Tax Board within 3 months of the date of our decision. Now, once you get to the Appellate Tax Board, if anyone knows how to tighten this thing so it doesn't keep drooping, is it one of these? Well, I'm going to give out the phone number to the State Appellate Tax Board so folks will have it in case it comes to that. So the ATB is 617-727-3100. I'm going to repeat that for folks. The Appellate Tax Board can be reached at 617-727-3100. Now, the good news is, even if you go on to the Appellate Tax Board, the door doesn't slam in your face, the door doesn't slam in the face of the assessors. We still have the opportunity to sit down and talk with you and possibly settle the case. So it isn't like, that's it, we're going to court and there's no other option here. At this time, I'd like to open it up to questions and comments. I don't know if Frank wants to come back and moderate. We'll do the best we can to try to answer any questions you might have.
We'll give you the microphone.
Yeah, sorry, I know we're in a small space and a small group, but as some of you may have noticed, when that fridge kicks on, it gets a little hard to hear. If folks wouldn't mind using the microphone, and we'll just make sure that everyone hears any info that might be relevant to them.
So if you could identify yourself and the property.
Robert Lyons. All I'm saying is, for us, my street right now, I can tell you right now, every house has been bought in 10 years. They either turn to condos or they're investors, and they're putting all kinds of people in there and they're making big rents. I'm down there, I've been there for 40 years almost. I got my family living there. My taxes went up $1,800 since 2010. And I understand the assessment, and all the houses are worth that. I'm not going to argue with you, And in 2010, I put in a the check to get an abatement, a check. And then once I check, yeah, the property's worth that. I understand that part. My property's worth that much money now, but I'm not making the money that these investors and the people are turning into condos. So the long-time people from Somerville, I don't know, that's who the ones that are getting hurt, and I know my kids can't buy a house around here. They're out of reach for us, Someone told me the other day, they're calling me the doctor's selling. I didn't know I had a doctor living on my street, and I make pretty good money myself, but I mean, it's at $1,800 every 4 years, it becomes unsustainable after a point, like once you retire or whatever, So I think that's the biggest problem right now, is what's happening is someone really is going crazy, but the longtime residents are probably going to be hurting a little bit unless there's some way, some sort of relief for them, And I have one more point. I don't want to hog this thing, but I can tell you one thing, and I know a lot about the neighborhood. My street, right at my corner, and the 2 houses on Packet, they were built by the same guy, the same exact houses, same exact land. And I want to know why I get punished, because if I do my house, I put new windows in, I fix the porches, and that they tough zones those houses, and they just do the minimum, and they have a lower assessment. And they told me that we'll come into your house, we'll go from the basement to the attic, and it's like, well, if you did it, of course I did things. I lived there, I want to keep it clean, neat, and everything else. And other people come in, these investors, they don't do anything, they just collect the rents, so. And we get hurt. So that's the point, I think. That's my personal thing. It's just somehow the longtime residents need a little bit of help, I know we get that residential, you live there, but, so.
Thank you for your comments, sir. You raised a lot of good points. What we have now in the state is called an ad valorem system, which simply means by value. So what you said is exactly correct. We have to value based on what the houses are worth. You gave a perfect example that we often give to taxpayers in the office. If you have 2 houses side by side, one was last updated in 1978, the other underwent a gut rehab in 2005, which one's worth more? The state says, obviously, the one that had the gut rehab in 2005. That's the system we have. Unfortunately, when it comes to valuation, the assessors have no ability whatsoever to consider, as important as it is to the community and you, how long you've been here, whether you went to high school here, what your income is, your age. None of those factors can be considered when we put a value on the real estate. All we're doing is looking at the real estate and trying to determine value. Now, there are a few things, you're probably well aware of them. Somerville does have the residential exemption. So hopefully you know for a fact, if you're the resident, that you're living there. I'm sorry, that you're getting the residential exemption. Folks have until April 1st, unlike the overvaluation where you only have 1 month, with a residential exemption and a statutory exemption, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, folks have longer. You have until April 1. So if anyone is here who lives in their property and is not sure that they're getting the residential exemption, by all means, look at that tax bill. There's a line right in the middle of the bill that will tell you residential exemption, and it'll give you the amount. Right now, the valuation reduction is, I think it's $150,674 to be exact. If you live there and you see that line is blank or zero, you definitely want to come in immediately and file for that residential exemption. You have until April 1. That falls on a business day. Now, we also have statutory exemptions. It's the clerks in our office who deal with this on a day-to-day basis. They know it much better than I do. But there are exemptions for folks who are 65 and older. There are exemptions for folks 70 and older. There are exemptions for veterans, for widows and widowers. There are numerous programs within the Mass General laws that you might qualify for. There are income and asset limits, though. So if you have any question about whether you might qualify for one of these statutory exemptions, which would lower your tax bill, you should definitely contact our office. I think on the last line of the handout is our office phone number. You can talk to any one of our clerical staff who are expert in helping you with all the requirements. Those are the major things that you should do. Another thing you should do, and I've got my taxpayer hat on now, not my assessor hat. Go online, or come in and look at your property record. And this is really advice as a fellow taxpayer, not the advice I would give as an assessor. As an assessor, I want to get your value right. If you have 3 bathrooms, I want to be sure we're assessing you for 3 bathrooms. If you have central air, I want to make sure that's in your property record. But as a fellow taxpayer, take a look at your property record. Go through it. You know, is the assessor's information accurate? If you think that what we've got is okay and not something you want to pursue further, you know, maybe you want to come to that conclusion. You don't have to let us in, okay? But it's always good to be aware of what we're assessing you for. You may look at it and decide to leave well enough alone, and that is advice strictly as a fellow taxpayer. The assessor, as the assessor, I'll say something completely different. My goal is to get into the property, make sure everything is accurate, so we have fair and equitable assessments. That's the best advice I can give, sir, at this time, though.
Sir, you have a question?
Yeah. So my property value went up 25%, the assessment.
Okay, can we get your name, sir?
My name's Alan Ball, and I live on Francesca.
Okay, thank you.
It went up 25%. I looked at all the other singles around my area, and they're all went up between 9.5 and, you know, maybe 14.5%. I haven't touched anything on the house as far as improvements for 3-4 years. The structure itself, the value went up $100,000. It hasn't changed. It wouldn't cost $100,000 more this year to build the house than it did last year. And when I look at the assessment per square foot, I'm paying almost $350 per square foot considering my living space, and other houses, single families, are paying $100 less per square foot. How can there be such incongruity on one street?
I believe you have filed an appeal already, if
Yeah.
I'm correct. Okay. We can't get into the specifics of your application. It'll be reviewed by all of them. But from our side of the fence, there are always reasons why your assessed value is different than somebody else. And I want to point out that your assessment district extends far beyond just your street. But if everything else is equal, then you should have approximately the same assessment. I'm going to venture to say the chances are we have a different condition factor on your property as opposed to somebody else on your street. Possibly we have a different quality of construction factor as well. There may be amenities that you have that others don't have. If everything else is equal, it would be impossible for the values to vary that much. But we will review your application. We'll consider anything and everything you've given to us, and you will be notified. Have you actually received anything from us yet?
I'm still waiting.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the appeal period just started, so, you know, as I said, we have 3 months from the date of your application. But the assessors will do their due diligence, and we'll inform you.
Can I follow up with
Sure.
just
Yep.
two other questions? One is, only recently did I refinance, and I worked out with the bank not to have an escrow account. So the insurance and the taxes are much more transparent to me now, because it used to be handled by an escrow account, and I never could figure out what was going on there. And I imagine that a lot of people do have escrow accounts, and so what they're actually paying in taxes gets all bundled in with their insurance or whatever.
Right.
And I would suppose, from what I've seen, you know, a more complete or a more transparent accounting of on the bill that, hey, you have gone up and pay attention to this would be valuable, because when I brought this up with other people, they had no clue of what went up. Did the insurance go up? Did the taxes go up? Did their mortgage adjust?
Sure.
You know, it's very confusing if you've got an escrow account paying your taxes, which I bet 80% of the mortgages have.
It's a good point, sir. We've heard that before. It's incumbent upon property owners to stay aware of what the assessed value is from year to year, how the tax rate changes from year to year. I have had any number of taxpayers, as you just described, call us well after the appeal period, say, I just got a notice from my bank telling me I got to start sending them $120 more a month. When did this happen? Well, you were mailed the tax bill, and that would have informed you of what the new actual tax was, what the assessed value was. A lot of times I'm told, well, it's paid through the bank. I never even look at it. You want to look at that. You always want to look at your tax bill. If you're a property owner, you have to be aware of what's going on. And right now, there's so much on the tax bill. For the Department of Revenue to allow us to start putting what the value was in the previous year and what the value was in the fiscal year, right now I can tell you almost 99.9% certain that they would not allow that. Every year's a new year, and they're going to simply require that you get all the information on the bill for the fiscal year in question. They're not going to let you put the previous year's information on that. But that information's available.
Yeah, if you could put a link to the website where you can look up your property and see how it's changed over time.
Our website is available to anyone who goes on the city website. You can look back over the years to see what the previous assessed values were. So that information is available in the assessor's homepage.
Okay.
It is there.
And just one last one. Has there ever been a discussion about having a cap on how much an assessed value can change in a year? So if you're way out of whack, maybe you have 3 years to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not as huge a shock
Right.
in any one year that just blows your financing.
Well, there is actually a law, Proposition 2.5, that limits how much our levy, the total tax monies we take in on the property tax from year to year. It does not, however, common misconception, affect an individual's property. Now, we also have to submit values to the Department of Revenue annually, and if the numbers aren't there to support an increase in a given year, we're not going to get our values approved. We can't, for example, in fiscal 12 say, well, we think we might have a big increase in 2013. We're going to stick in some value now. That would never fly with the Department of Revenue. The numbers have to be there to back up our assessments. Now, this year was a very interesting year, a bit of an anomaly. I have never in my 25 years of assessing seen a community get pushed back a year in the revaluation. And as I spoke about earlier, there was opportunity in fiscal 2013, which would have been the normal reval year, to start to build some value back into the system. We held off for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. So in this year, which was an anomaly, that could have happened. We could have put some value back in 2013, and the impact would have been a little less now. My own sense is that folks would have felt an impact last year and be appealing or filing an appeal, and they would have got hit again this year and would also be filing an appeal. But unless those numbers are there, we can't just make it up. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Sir, wait on the microphone.
Thank you. Hi, excuse me. My name is Roland Draper. I'm the CEO at Somerville Municipal Federal Credit Union located in Teal Square. First of all, I want to thank you, Mark and staff, for coming out and taking the time to give us some direction on this. We had our property increase about 55% in the assessment value, and it looks like the quarterly payment is close to double. So we are interested in putting through an abatement request. I took some notes here. I see that you've mentioned get an inspection, or ultimately that could be a result coming out. I don't believe we had one. I'm going to look over my past income expense form and certainly have an ability to check comparable sales for commercial properties. You had mentioned, Mark, I think in the beginning, you send in the form, but you don't have to be concerned about getting an attorney or certainly getting an appraisal. So I guess that was what I wanted to also find out. I mean, the credit union could get an appraisal beforehand. Is it you're saying that's not necessary to back up because the assertion will be that the property's not worth that amount.
Anyone who files an appeal has the right to pursue hiring an attorney or getting an appraisal, but it's not required. Even when you get to the appellate tax board, it's still not required, but at that point, it's more likely that you would want to bring in an attorney and consider an appraisal.
Okay,
At this point, it's not.
let me rephrase it then. Based on your 25 years of being in this line of work, and is it more advantageous to have an appraisal on hand when the abatement is submitted?
I would say that that's a personal decision that each taxpayer has to make. If you don't do it now, you can always do it later. So at this point, I would make sure that the basics have been completed. Did we get an inspection? Were we let into the building? Did you give us an income and expense form? Is there something peculiar about your building that we might be unaware of? You can always make that decision down the road. Personally, I would probably go the route directly with the assessors, filing on your own behalf. From my point of view, you're going to get the same review one way or the other. And you can always hold that in the background on the back burner, that at some point I may want to bring in an attorney or have an appraisal completed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, James Bossy, Chetwynd Road. I don't know where my assessment went, if it went up or down. I haven't checked it. I intend to, but I missed a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting, and I heard you mention something about inspections and comparable sales. Now, what percentage of the assessment, or is there one, that's based on comparable sales, and what percentage is based on an inspection? Also, is there anything in effect that would verify residential exemption? Because I get the feeling that residential exemptions may be a little abused.
Lots of good questions. Let me start with the last one first. Our marching orders, ever since we've had the residential exemption, are to research these things to death. And we do that. Every year, we send out about 1,000 to 1,200 recertification applications to folks who've been getting the residential exemption for the longest period of time. And we require them to submit all their information again to verify that they're still eligible for that exemption. So we take it extremely seriously. And you want to keep in mind, there's only about 10 communities in the Commonwealth that even offer this.
Okay, not to interrupt you, but I have to. So is there any physical inspection to make sure that person's actually living on that property? Or is it just through form?
Well, we may have gotten in through another purpose, but there are basic requirements. The Mass General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 5C requires that it be your principal domicile for income tax reporting purposes. We also require corroborating documentation, such as an up-to-date automobile registration, a utility bill of some sort addressed to the property owner in question, evidence of voter registration. But these are the basic things we require according to the Department of Revenue. We might, as an aside, for another purpose, discover that through an inspection that somebody doesn't live there. But once somebody files a tax return, they're not going to falsify a tax return. That's highly unlikely, something that's going to the State Department of Revenue or to the U.S. federal government. Your other questions were about the percent that rely on sales. I can tell you that our condo property values are based strictly on the sales comparison approach. I can tell you that inspections are important for every single property in the city, regardless of the method of valuation we use. We rely heavily on sales for our 1, 2, and 3 family values, as well as our commercial and other income-producing properties, such as apartments with 4 or more units, to help us develop land value. So the sales are relied on very heavily. The best approach to value is always the sales comparison approach, if you have enough sales to support it. I think I've touched on all your questions. Have I left anything
Yeah,
out
you
there?
have. Yeah, you
Okay.
have. But like this gentleman, Mr. Lyons, I believe, first said, yeah, there's a lot of sales to investors, especially in the Tufts area here, because it is a very lucrative thing to put as many students as you can in an apartment and maximize your return. Yeah.
Sure.
And I think you're seeing a lot of that here, which is driving up the sales of the the values of the properties, and the comps are, of course, jumping up equally.
Yep. I would agree with that, and I can
That
elaborate.
should be taken into consideration, I think.
As long as we verify that those are legitimate sales that were exposed to the marketplace, probably involved a realtor, and are considered arm's length transactions, we're bound to use those sales. We see it a lot with condominium conversion, where we'll see the empty nesters finally sell the home, they sell it to XYZ LLC or XYZ Corporation. They come in, they rehab the property, they convert it to condos. But that sale from the empty nesters to the corporation went through a local realtor, was exposed to the marketplace. In every regard, is considered a market transaction. We're bound to use those sales because they reflect what the property's worth. But I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sophie Z, and I live here in the Teal Square neighborhood. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at public speaking, so this might not come out very clearly. I appreciate all of the information that's been provided this evening, and I think some really good questions have been asked. I think what underlies a lot of these concerns is the ongoing gentrification of the city. And I understand that there are meetings set up to discuss that specifically, but I think that's really what we're all getting at here, is that as folks like myself, young urban professionals, are moving in and moving into these condos that these developers are putting in, we're driving up the cost of living here for everybody. So my question is, there are cities around the country who have taken steps to mitigate the impact on the community so that the cost of housing does not spiral out of control upwards and push the community out that has been there for a long time. So as I sit here in a room full of people who, grew up here, raised their families here, I don't feel right necessarily as I'm shopping for a home to settle into, being a part of that kind of a problem. So I guess my question to Somerville is, are there any plans to take steps to mitigate what is already happening and what is only going to continue to happen? And, and I also have a personal interest as well in that if I do buy a home here, is my property value going to continue to skyrocket, and are my taxes going to skyrocket? How do I plan for that? So, are there anything in the works right now to take any kind of steps to mitigate what is happening, what is going to continue happening here?
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Mark has a response.
An excellent question. I must tell you, generally, beyond the realm of assessing, I can tell you a few things that I know are going on in the city. There is a condominium review board in the city with regulations that requires notice to existing tenants. Anyone who wants to file a master deed to condominiumize their property must get a removal permit or must get a certificate of exemption. And what that means in plain English is they have to give existing tenants a one-year opportunity to either buy the property or move out, to give them that notice. If they're a senior, I believe they have to give them 2 years' notice. Some of your questions would probably be better addressed to the planning department in some of those Resi-Stat and Somerstat meetings. But I can also tell you that in the zoning ordinance, there is a linkage program. Again, beyond what the assessors do, but I am aware of it, that if you're proposing a development of so many units, a certain percentage have to be dedicated to affordable housing. We've also seen one developer who developed a very large condo project in south of Union Square along Webster and Norfolk Street, who voluntarily made some of those units affordable. But the planning department is always working on affordable housing programs and trying to address that issue. In addition, as you're all well aware of, this is the first year that the city went to a CPA surcharge on your tax bill, that extra thing you're seeing for the first time this year. And that stands for the Community Preservation Act. And those monies that the city's taking in are specifically going to go to the purchase of open space, preservation of historical properties, and developing affordable housing. So there are things underway, there are things going on out there, but your question is an excellent one. I'm hearing it today. We heard it 10 years ago, we heard it 15 years ago.
Okay, so just a couple of thoughts. So thank you, I appreciate that, and I'm glad to know there are some things being looked at. As far as if somebody wants to buy up a building and flip it into condos, giving folks 1 year or 2 years notice. I grew up in Chicago in a working class neighborhood. I watched the families around me one by one basically get kicked out of their homes and leave the city, leave the state. So that's ultimately what happens. So I'm just curious to see, you know, from a community standpoint, what steps Somerville is going to be willing to take to prevent that kind of mass changeover. I know there's no easy answer. No one's really figured out the gentrification question, but I'm really hoping that this city will be different from the others that are out there. And as far as affordable housing, again, a concern that I have is that there's a lot of attention on lower income affordable housing, and then you have these higher luxury condominiums being built, and the middle gets lost. The middle class gets forgotten in the middle. So now I understand that, you know, your department can't do anything about these things, but you're feeling the heat because as all these things are happening and property values are increasing, people are going to get their tax bill and they're going to be upset and they're going to come to you and say what happened. So again, I understand that you may not have the answers for the questions that I'm raising, but I think these are the kinds of things that, you know, I hope are being thought about and that will be discussed at the future meetings that have been planned that I'm aware of. There may be others, just so that we can all know where we're headed.
Excellent points. I would like to suggest, though, the flip side of all the condominium development we've seen in the city is that it can have those gentrifying impacts, but it also allows a lot of first-time buyers an affordable property if they want to stay in the city. Because the condos continue, even though they're selling extremely well, they continue to be, because of their smaller size, far more within reach of a young person, far more in reach of a young couple.
I would just say that that's arguable. As a young working professional, I would say that that's really debatable.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
I think we really are pricing middle-class people out.
Okay.
So that's my opinion.
That's
what it's
fine. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. We'll get you the microphone.
I just want to say that's the point I was trying to make is we know we got to pay the tax. The houses are worth the money with this tax that it's for, but that's what happens to the people, the long-time people in this community. We're getting punished because of the people, the investors, and everybody, people who convert into condos, and they're making big bucks, and we're not. And we know we're not going to come up and get a rebate because it is worth that much. I'm not trying to my house. I know what it's worth now on the market, and thanks to what's happening. But I know the last house is sold. We had 52 families on my street, maybe so many years ago, but now there's maybe 8. And everybody else, I don't even know the condo people and the other people. And the last house that sold, the guy that passed away, the family sold it, and they had an open house on a Monday. There was the Andre Realty told me there's 60 people already been here. He goes, and I'll have a cash sale by the end of the day. And if I did it on a weekend, I would have had to have a cop for detail. There've been so many people there as he had it on a Monday, and that's what's happening, And that's our point. Not coming up there and trying to get a rebate or an abatement. It's what's happened with the property is kind of hurting like the longtime people in this city.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Hi, my name is Judy Jacobs. I've lived in Somerville my whole life, and my dad was here in 1930, so I've seen a lot of things happening and that I don't like about the city. I'm speaking for those who are low income, middle income, and elderly especially. I'm worried about what's going to happen to them once they reach a max with their tax bills. I decided to keep my family property on Claremont Street, and I've had arguments with the Assessors Office over the work that I did at my house for about 7 years, and I live there, so I do qualify for the residential exemption, but two points I want to make about that. I think it should be raised for those of us who've decided to stay here, make this our home, and take care of our property, where there's a lot of absentee landlords that do not take care of their properties or their tenants. So I think that needs to be argued, it should be raised, and for those who decided to leave Somerville and neglect their properties, I think they should be footing the bill here for the raising of our taxes. I feel like, I don't know exactly how much it's gone up for me because I do have a mortgage, but I do see the bill. And now I have an escrow problem with my bank because of it, because they neglected to increase my mortgage. But I'm dealing with that as well. And it's probably $1,000 a year. Okay, I'm up to almost $9,000 a year for my taxes. And my property, luckily for me, I was smart at the time. I increased the quality of living in my life, my home. I did all the kitchens over, and I get good rent. However, that rent will have to now go up if my taxes go up. I have a full-time job at one of the local colleges. It's not Tufts, but it's another college, and I make a good salary. But if the taxes keep going up, I will have to possibly sell, and that makes me really upset because I don't want to leave my home. And I believe that if we're doing too much hiring in the city, that needs to stop. We don't need to create more jobs. We need to figure out a way to keep people here without giving it away to gentrification, because that's exactly what this is. I see what's going on in Boston, in Cambridge, and the wave has come here too now. And it's really unfair that, you've decided to take a different route to this problem, and it's not a solution. It's just a lot of excuses. I've talked to the mayor, I've voiced my opinions. There's too much development. I mean, you guys are like doing everything everywhere. It's all too soon. And it's all because of the Green Line extension. And, Tufts wants what they want. I've been to the Powder House meetings. I go to Ready Start. I am attending the gentrification. I mean, for anyone who's hearing this, I urge you to go to all the meetings and speak your voice, because we won't get a chance. Once this keeps climbing, we won't be able to go back. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Do we have any other questions this evening? Mr. Mackey.
Thank you very much. My name is Stephen Mackey. I'm with the Somerville Chamber of Commerce. The Somerville Chamber has about 290 members. They're about 90% of them are small enterprises. They're for-profits, nonprofits, they're property owners, and in many instances, they're tenants of properties. So from a lot of different perspectives, very concerned, as the rest of the people here tonight are. One thing I have to say about the community is there is, in a lot of areas, a tremendous amount of progress, and I want to point out that the small business community is part of what makes Somerville so special, and we'd like to keep that going and healthy. And I appreciate the assessor's remarks relative to being unhappy at the 50% increase threshold. I think also we'd understand as an assessor that if you get a bill that's gone up more than the 15% average that was projected, and you can't figure out exactly why that happened, it's prudent of you to really investigate and look into the evidence as to why your bill is 20%, 30%, 40% higher. So there really is a lot of concern. I've spoken with members of the chamber and others who have an array of issues. A lot of them have already been brought up here tonight. One that hasn't been focused on, that virtually everybody I speak with is focused on in the business community and hopes to find out more about over time. We understand it's a very complex issue, is the methodology. The actual numbers, rates, comparisons, market things, and property characteristics and so forth, really down to the detail. Because if you're at 20% or 30%, that's the prudent thing to do. At 50%, you're unhappy, and and you might aggressively want to do that. In the meantime, we suggest to people that it's very important that February 3rd deadline, and that maybe consulting, I'm not an attorney, maybe consulting an attorney about the process, because there may be expenses in order to put your evidence forward, that you might explore that before making the decision, but the clock is ticking. In the meantime, we appreciate the public disclosure that the Assessors Office has made. We think a little bit more in the long term. We might look at a further protocol about public disclosure. And we very much would like, and I think it serves everybody, businesses large and small, people that had big increases, people that didn't, and residents, to really get more familiar with the exact methodology as much as possible. So we look forward to working with you with that, and we appreciate very much that the administration puts the light on this tonight and again on Monday and going forward, and that's really progress, and we appreciate it. So we look forward to an effective dialogue with the administration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mackey. Do you have any other questions? Seeing none, we appreciate everyone coming out tonight, taking advantage of this opportunity for Mark and his staff to come out and explain to you the process of how assessments are done and what the appeal process is for an abatement, both at the local and the state level. If you have any other questions, we encourage you to call the Assessors Office or call the Department of Revenue, both of which contact numbers, I believe, are on the sheets that Mark and his staff gave out at the door. If you don't have one, please come up and get one. In the meantime, do recall that February 3rd is the deadline for filing an abatement. If you have any questions at all about that, exemptions whatsoever, the city's Assessor's Office is there to help you. Thank you very much. Good night.